Hi everyone, this is my midterm project for spreadsheet engineering. I chose to do a project on data about the federal stimulus bill that passed after the financial crisis. And apparently a significant amount of money from the stimulus went to New York City, and I was able to pull a lot of information about all that money from the New York City Open Data website. So you'll see my data set here is directly from the New York City Open Data website. It's a really good data set. It has a lot of detail about each project, and it tracks it down to some degree of granularity. You see that you have the amount of funding, the city agencies involved, how status of the project, percentage of funds spent, dates that the funds were appropriated and transferred to the city. It's a pretty good data set here, and I was really excited about this data because the stimulus was so controversial, and I thought that it would be really good to have do some analysis on whether or not that the money had been well spent, whether or not what agencies were getting the money, how long it took them to spend the money. So there's a lot of information here that really lets us look at this really controversial issue with some detail. So this is my data set, and I decided to make a dashboard of a bunch of different pivot tables and pivot charts. So I'm going to go to that dashboard right now. So you'll see that I chose 4 separate views of the data. So I did a total by funding category, and you'll see here that Medicaid relief is by far the most amount of money spent from this federal stimulus, and that was pretty surprising to me, because you wouldn't think that Medicaid dollars would have a stimulative effect on the economy. You'd just think that the idea of a stimulus package is that you give people money and then they spend that money and that stimulates economic activity. But this is just sort of people only go to the doctor when they're sick, and so it's not really an expenditure that you'd think would have direct economic effect. But maybe that's wrong. So you see the categories here, and really Medicaid is by far the most. I have it broken down by total by lead city agency, and you'll see the Department of Education is the first one here. I think you're not seeing the Medicaid relief here because that didn't go to a specific city agency. You see here the $507 million for education is the same $507 million here for the Department of Education, so there's significant education spending. And then again, you see it drops off pretty far here. So there's some really big ticket spending items, and then, the crumbs are sent to all these other agencies. I broke it down by project status. This was really surprising to me, seeing that this amount of money is appropriated projects that are less than 50% completed, and you'll see that there's hardly any fully completed projects, and so a lot of the money seems to be appropriated, but then not really. The projects maybe don't go anywhere that quickly, which is interesting. And this is kind of another view of the same thing, total by percentage of funds spent. So this means that the money has been allocated to projects, but then it hasn't yet been spent. So, which is interesting. You see by far the most money has been, only 0 to 5% of it has been spent after being allocated to a project. So we heard a lot about this idea of shovel-ready projects from the administration when they were trying to sell this stimulus bill, and this may be kind of counter as evidence that that's not really the case. That shovel-ready projects maybe didn't really exist because there's all this money being given to people, but that they haven't really spent it yet. So these are the actual pivot charts that I made, and I've added some slicers to make this to let you drill down and see how these all relate to each other. So these are all linked to each other. So you can click on completed, and you'll see that these all automatically update. You'll see that for all the projects that are 50% or more completed, you'll see how it's broken down here. And then so this is a pretty rich dashboard just in terms of what it lets you see. And these are all obviously linked to pivot tables, and I'll show you those down here at the bottom. So each pivot chart has a pivot table. You'll see these here. And there's one interesting thing that I found out about using this data set is that I had to do, just by way of, because the data was structured a certain way, I had to do average of stimulus spending, not total. And I'll show you why that is. So in the data, one project could have many different lines. So you'll see here that this is all one project, but it's broken out into multiple lines because I think there are multiple payments for one project. So you'll see that there's differences here, but then this is all just one project, and you'll see that this is a better example here. You'll see that these numbers are all the same here. So rather than, if I were just to take the sum of this project, it would be giving me 97 million when in fact it's only 32 million. So I didn't want to use a sum in my pivot chart, so I did an average. So that's basically adding up all these, and then it is dividing it by however many numbers there are here. So it's basically 32 million times 3 divided by 3. And that's going to give us just this number here, 32. So that I'm using the average value setting here lets you kind of compensate for just the peculiarities of the data set. So that was actually a really important thing that I learned about this project, is that you have to be really careful about how the data is structured, and a big part of working with data is cleaning up data and getting it into a workable format, and not really and sort of seeing where potential errors might come if you just throw something into a pivot table. That might not be the best way to do it, or that might give you misleading information. So I created 4 pivot tables here. I'm using average stimulus, average of stimulus funding for all of them to counteract that problem I just described. You'll see here that it's a pretty simple pivot table, but I just put it in rows, and then the values is the average of stimulus spending for all 4. And I got a pivot chart here that I then copied under the dashboard, and then I added slicers here and linked all these slicers up. So in terms of the most important feature that was most helpful to me, I think the slicer really adds a lot of functionality to this dashboard, because you can just click on any combination of filters you want, and you're going to see exactly, for example, so what projects, how much money is devoted to a project that has 10 to 15% of the funds spent, and is it an energy efficiency category. And so you'll see that that's the number. You see that this is the agency that got that funding. So you really can kind of drill down in any way you want. So I think that slicers are really the best way to do it. The best thing for this project, and I didn't really use slicers a lot before this, and so I learned how powerful slicers can be. So that's my project, and thanks for watching.